Hello, welcome to the Power Rewired podcast. I'm Catarina von Maydell.
And I'm Liza Collins.
Liza, it is such a pleasure to be here for our first recording of this podcast, especially after all the conversations that we've been having.
Exactly, it's taken a while.
Yeah. So we keep coming back to power, which is why we called this podcast the Power Rewired. What's so important for you about talking about power and rewiring power? Why does this matter to you?
What's important to me is, I guess, what I've been observing over the last couple of years is how powerless people are feeling and how powerless I have felt. And that's been within organizations, and that's also been in personal situations. So there's something about power that I'm learning more about from the conversations I'm having with you. And it just feels like I need to know more about it because it feels like there's something missing. And I'm just noticing with other people, they're feeling the same. So I guess the why we doing this for me feels important to discuss power. So we're really clear about what it is and what we're learning, what we're discovering, and also sharing that with others to help others reclaim their own power and know these power games that are at play within organizations in other parts of society, which on the one hand, I think we know that they're there, but we don't really know the rules of the game. It's almost like we're operating with the lights out. So I'd like to think what we're doing is switching the lights on and having this conversation and helping all of us reclaim our power. And if there are any changes that we want to make, for us to understand that we do have agency, we do have options. And that feels really important for me right now. How about you?
Very much along the same lines as you. And obviously, what's interesting is we're both coming from slightly different perspectives. So I would agree with everything that you've said. In the conversations that I'm having with people right now, I'm surprised at how many people are feeling incredibly unsettled about different things. Yeah. And it's as our world gets really chaotic, like really we've gone from complexity and we're moving into chaotic. Complexity means there's many moving parts and a single person can't sort of work in complexity alone. Chaos means it's almost impossible to understand what's happening and why it's happening. And we really are flying by the seat of our pants. So given what's happening in climate, given what's happening with technology, with AI and other things, major job losses, major unemployment. It's not all because of AI, but it's a large part of it. Increasing geopolitical tensions, expectation of that only to increase. Very few people in the political world really expect that's going to decrease. It really doesn't matter where we look. There's things going on. Our economies are starting to become very rocky now. So there's a lot of reasons for a lot of people to feel unsettled. And when people feel unsettled, they do one of two things. They go into threat response, really. And generally, you either fight or you retreat in some way. So the flight or freeze or fawn are in effect retreating approaches. The fawn is sort of half retreating and half fighting. But it's really like you either go into the fray or you try and stay away from the fray. But that's not really useful. And you would use the word collaboration. I can't remember if you used already in this conversation, but you've used the word collaboration quite often.
Yeah.
And if we want to address, we're sort of in that territory of wicked problems where there are no solutions and we just need to keep sort of shifting systems as we're changing things. But there's no answers. We're in a territory where there's not the right thing to do anymore. It's all about experimentation now. And that means we have to show up, embrace the fear that we've got, embrace the anger that we've got, learn how to use that as sources of information, and then work with other people in order to really start making those changes that will evolve our systems that will nudge us in the right direction. So a lot of that requires people having a lot of power, intrinsic power, like really understanding how do they manage themselves? How do they leverage their strengths? And how do they work with other people in order to collectively create the change that we need? Because nobody's going to do it on their own.
Mm.
Yeah. So this idea of power starts from within, and it really is about understanding the game of it. And it's also finding the joy in it. So many of us have been taught that power is dirty and power is wrong. But the reality is, power is how we get things done, right?
Mm.
So we're in a position where if we choose to abdicate our power, which many of us have been able to get away with doing for a long period of time, at this point in time, we're kind of abdicating responsibility in many different ways. And we can't tackle all problems. We have to pick the area we want to focus on and the people we want to work with. But it really is that we have to engage in a way that we've never engaged before.
Mm.
And it's not all scary. It's not all dirty. There's actually real joy and real meaningfulness that can come from this. And that's the piece that I think both of us are really interested in promoting as well, is really like how do we make this meaningful? And how do we make that work that we need to do actual a joyful process? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's something for me around bringing transparency to some of the mechanisms of that. Because you're right, when you think about power, and certainly in my background coming from within the health service, and I've worked in it for a long, long time, it does feel like a dirty word. And
Mm-hmm.
I quite often meet with people and talk to people who are very disempowered at work. A lot of the work I do is around bullying in the workplace. So people are feeling very disempowered. But what I've noticed when I'd had that experience, I was actually giving my power away.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's something about seeing power as this dirty word, really honing into that, I've got integrity and a moral compass. Well, that's fine. It's great. I can still have that, and I can still know how to hold power and play the power game. And I think that's where I've been learning as I've recovered from some of these workplace situations. What I really, really love about the conversations that we've been having. So when we're talking about the power starts within us, and then there's this external power, there's almost, and you wrote about this beautifully a couple of days ago on LinkedIn, of this sense of intuition and this internal power is mystical. And I think for a while it has been seen like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're both really fascinated with the vagus nerve and the nervous system. A lot of the work that I do in terms of bullying is around being caught in the threat response, how that causes trauma, how that causes harm in the body. So I think even just starting with our vagus nerve and our nervous system, tripping my words, and really understanding this is actually about science. This is understanding our biology. It's not mystical. If we can start to understand, are we regulated? If we're regulated, how can we co-regulate others? And I think that's really key in leadership. And that's what I talk a lot about in terms of the future of leadership. How can we be regulated and co-regulate others? Because I see that as leaders, we turn up as external nervous systems. If we're agitated, other people are going to be agitated. So we have a responsibility to be able to regulate our nervous systems and actually think about how we show up to others. And given we are now, and like you rightly said, we're now in a time of such complexity and things that are just moving around, that there's no safety bars to hold on to any longer. So regulating our nervous system, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves and for our families. And we need that in order to collaborate, because you're right, once we get trapped in that fight or flight or fawning, we lose the ability to collaborate. And I've been hearing lots of people talking about this paradigm shift that we're in, and I agree. I think we're on the verge of something new, and we're moving through that chaos. If you think about chaos theory, it's like, how do you unhook from point A to get to B? And that bit in the middle is free flowing. And this is where we have the power, if we tap into it correctly, to navigate that with a bit more, not certainty, but a bit more comfort, and we can collaborate in that as well. because otherwise, if we're in fight or flight, we're just in that shutdown mode, and we just miss the opportunities for seeing what's out there and who we can connect in with, because we're literally just we've shut down. So there's something for me about starting within, and actually how practical that is for all of us to start working with immediately.
Layering onto that, so the internal and the vagus nerve and I like your image of the leader being the external nervous system. So there's really, the nervous system is our intelligence, our intuition. It's how the vagus nerve is sort of how we connect with other people as well. The way I'm saying it is not completely scientifically accurate, but in practical use, that's kind of the gist of it. Yeah. And then we need to layer on that skill of power as well. And that's going back to when you were saying that when you felt bullied, you recognize in hindsight that a lot of times you're giving away your power. And it's because you never had the skills of power. Yeah. And it's easy to say that as women, we weren't taught the skills of power. Some women I know are masters at it. Some are quite manipulative at it. Some are quite wise with it. I think men generally do learn the rules of power a little bit more, but even men, I think, depending on where they grew up and where they worked, I don't think they really have that much of a leg up on it than women do. I think the key thing is there's many people who, through their families primarily, and perhaps some of the education that they had access to, they learned the power game more explicitly. And many of us kind of learned it implicitly, but we learned to be scared of it, shy of it, because we didn't understand how to get into it. But if we start understanding how to map the dynamics of power, if we start understanding how do people get power, how do they keep power, how do they get formal power, how do they get informal power, and if we start sort of pulling these pieces apart so that we understand the game of power, that's a really important piece to sort of partner with the vagus nerve. So the internal is what our abilities are, of what we're ready and willing to do, and the skills of power are what we're able to do, the competencies. Yeah. So if we kind of marry those two together, that to me is really where real power comes from. And that's why even if we don't have formal power, even if we don't have a lot of resources, we have incredible amounts of power if we're ready, willing, and able to embrace that.
Yeah.
And that realization can scare a lot of people and again trigger the fight, flight, or freeze or fawn response, right? So, even just the process of learning the power game can trigger us in other ways. So there's this real symbiotic relationship, but we need to work with both sides at the same time.
Yeah. And I think for me as well, through our conversations over the last couple of months, I've started to understand where I've had power in the past, and I've had a lot more informal power than when I had formal power. I was using it in a way that was still informal, because that my strength was actually in the informal, and that didn't serve me very well when I wasn't using that formal power in the way that I was expected to use it. And so I think there's something about, I like what you said about becoming wise to power, and also understanding within that wisdom, where do we already lean into our power, but we maybe aren't that clear about it, and how can we do more of that, and then how can we balance it with other power dynamics. So I think there's something really strategic about this, which I really like. And one of the best bits of advice that you gave me as well recently was in terms of going back to the vagus nerve, how am I working strategically with my nervous system and my vagus nerve in terms of handling the power that is coming up for me in certain situations. And that was just such a powerful thing for you to have said to me, for me to then reflect on, yeah, you're absolutely right. Because if I'm not ready for this next step up, and I'm not preparing myself, then that's not going to serve me or my message or the work that I'm doing. And actually, I could potentially end up becoming ill because I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I can't cope with the amount of workload. So that was really poignant when you gave me that advice. And so I think there's something around that as well, isn't it? That we can all learn again, there's different skills and competencies around power and how to be more wise with it. I love that frame, become wise to power.
Yeah. Two things. Just for people who are listening to this, I always talk about 3 levels of dealing with trauma. And I use the word trauma. The definition that I like is when people are overreacting or underreacting to what's actually in front of them. It's not about what happened to you historically. It's really what's the impact been on you. So what you're referring to with the strategic is the highest level piece of it, but there's the palliative of when we go into the fight, flight, or freeze. What do we do to sort of calm ourselves in the moment? How do we take care of ourselves in the moment? That's the palliative. The healing part is how do we heal all the baggage that we're bringing with us that is causing us to overreact or underreact in whatever circumstance we're in. And the strategic, what you're referring to, is how do we really train ourselves to be oriented to the things that we really want? Because myself included, I've gone through many versions of this, and this summer has been a really interesting one for me in terms of really building this strategic alignment. Yeah, and really realizing how scared I've been of letting in the things that I actually have been working for a long time. Yeah, and really sort of training my nervous system to be open to those things and no longer be open to the things that I don't want. Yeah, well, in our future conversations, we'll talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
And this idea of playing the power game, one thing is there's definitely bullies and there's people who abuse power often because of incompetence and sometimes because they're true narcissists. But I think we're kind of throwing this word narcissist around a bit too much. And I think a lot of people that we're labeling as narcissists, they're actually just totally incompetent, right?
Yeah.
And therefore they just abuse their power because they don't know how to do it differently. But if we've got healthy people who are really trying to make a difference, it's kind of like a good game of tennis, right? We're both expected to show up with relatively equal skill sets. We're both expected to engage in the game fully. We're both expected to want to win, but not at any cost, right? But if for some reason I show up to a tennis game and I'm like, I'm feeling tired today, I don't think I'm going to try very hard, so I'll just sit and watch the ball go by. Like, the person I'm playing again is just going to get annoyed and either like walk off the court or try and hit me with the ball or whatever. Right? So we have to recognize that a healthy power game is one where people are playing together. And of course, there's a competitive element. And ideally, we want to try and balance that. And that's a contextual thing because different people in different circumstances have a different level of competitiveness. But, that's part of sort of the refereeing and just sort of being open with each other and saying, hey, maybe we can tone it down a little bit, or maybe we can amp it up a little bit, whatever, that's part of a healthy power game of where we're really trying to create something together. And we're both expected to show up and fully participate. And maybe, I've played tennis on and off for years. So there's constantly times where if I'm playing against people who are much more skilled at tennis, I'm like, I don't even actually understand the rules. You're going to have to explain to me that rule that I just broke or didn't know about or whatever. So, sometimes we have to clarify. But the point is we are expected to show up and expected to improve. Yeah.
Yeah. And just as you were talking, Nan, I was thinking that, this is a healthy part of what we do as humans, isn't it? If you think about it, because there's a certain amount of stress that we need in our lives in order to get us motivated. So in a way, you could even change the word competitiveness to motivation, because there is something about that, we get a dopamine hit from it. It's that motivation. It turns the stress up. So it's a bit of a fun stress. And that's what gets our systems going. And I guess we see it across all of life, don't we? In all mammals, when they kind of like come together and fight together and spar and play and also
the intrinsic, I guess it's sort of the intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic. And we need that balance of intrinsic and, the internal motivation and the external, I want to beat you today, right?
Yes. Yeah.
There's one I play against who's quite a bit better than me. And I know I'm rarely going to win against her. But for me, the intrinsic motivation is, did I get more points this time? Did I?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did I hit something better? Did I whatever, right? Sorry, I interrupted what you were going to say.
That's fine. So you can still see the growth as you're going along in terms of that interaction. Yeah. I suppose there's something for me as well then in terms of when we then come to power, this is about turning the lights on, because it feels like that we haven't all been given the same information about the rules of the game. And that's probably intentional for some people in society, or some groups of people in society, to keep them in positions of power. But I'm really interested in sharing what are those rules of the power game, so we can all become more competent, we can all gain those skills, we can all start enjoying that process and seeing it as a motivation and the dopamine hit that it should be, rather than a disempowering and stressful situation it could end up for individuals. So for me, there's something about actually what can we do to switch the light on, so we're all clear about the power that exists and the power that we've got. Because I think until we started talking, I really wasn't aware of how much power that I've got, and I'm not even tapping into. And this is really interesting and bizarre. I heard somebody talk about this a couple of weeks ago, that the human body, and it's kind of relevant, the human body has like enough electricity in it to power a small city for about a week and a half.
Oh, wow.
So if you think about that in terms of your energy levels for the day, because I was thinking, well, I've got, I know I've got energy levels in the morning, and then I'll do some exercise, and then by the afternoon I'm a bit knackered, so I'm just thinking, so where's my energy going? So if I've got enough energy to kind of keep a small city going for a week and a half, where are those energy leaks? Where are those drain leaks that are taking that energy away? And I've started to become more sort of noticing of those, and then cutting them off, and noticing my energy building. And I think it's the same thing with power. Surely it must be, because power is kind of almost like an energy currency. So where are we leaking it? Where are we giving it away? Where are we not even claiming it? And what are some of those things that we can do to tweak and tighten to just bring that power back into ourselves? And I think from these conversations, we're going to start to discover some of those, aren't we?
Yeah, I think so, very much. Yeah. I'm going to surprise you a little bit with this question. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what you are doing professionally and tie that to how it connects to the Power Rewired podcast, trying to do all words at once. Talk a little bit about what you are doing professionally and how it ties into what we're doing in the Power Rewired podcast, and what people can sort of learn from you. They've gotten a sense of what they can learn from us together, but what can they learn from you?
I'll try and keep this short, because I'm thinking we've got just under 10 minutes to wrap this up. So I will try and keep it short. So I've done over 30 years in the healthcare service, and I have witnessed lots of disempowerment. I am in the middle of writing a book about bullying, called The Physiology of Bullying, just looking at how damaging bullying is to us as humans and organizations and cultures. So the work that I'm doing professionally is working as a strategic consultant, working with organizations and individuals. And in a way, what I'm doing with them is rewiring their power. So I'm rewiring the power with individuals, so they understand, one, what the hell's going on with their body. Because most times when we're in the threat response and we start to tip into trauma, if it's continued abuse at work, then we really struggle to understand why our bodies are feeling so ill. So that's like switching on the light switch for them. And then there's some strategies. Now, I'm not a somatic therapist or a trauma therapist or anything like that. There are people that I've worked with to work through my own trauma. But I do signal some things that people can do. And I do signal people who they can go to, because that's a really big part of the work. And then with organizations, it's how do we shift into this new paradigm of leadership, where I see command and control is dead. So that's gone. Healthcare refusing to let go of command and control. I think it's less of a bad management leadership style and actually more of a system-wide risk. Where we are in terms of healthcare, if we're going to make the jump to survive, we need to have collaboration. And what we call transformation at the moment is just people managing change. There's no transformation. because real transformation, innovation cannot happen unless we've got a healthy culture. And that, that relates to healthy nervous system. So I talk about how leaders regulate their nervous system, how they can lead from a regulated system, and how they can co-regulate others. Talk about relational leadership and that collaboration piece that people are struggling to understand and make the shift from command and control. I also touch upon psychological safety. Again, these are all buzzwords that people don't really know what they mean. And we've got the evidence as well to show people don't know what they mean. So I go in and I teach the stepping stones of what that actually, what you need to put in place, because psychological safety is the outcome only. It's just the end result. And it's the same with relational leadership. There are blocks in place that we need to focus on. And those buzzwords are simply the outcome. And I think because of my background and researching in bullying within the NHS and supporting people, I've always implemented psychological safety without realizing it was a buzzword. So it's only when that word came in and I started thinking about, I've been doing that for years anyway, because it was a non-negotiable to create safety within my teams because of what I'd been exposed to in my early career through the research. So it's about helping leaders to understand what that means as well and how they can put that into practice. So it fits in quite nicely actually with the Power Rewired podcast, because I guess what I'm doing is some very practical steps of what you call the palliative, the healing. It's the culture repair, it's the going in, it's the hand holding people, not through their trauma. They need to get the trauma sorted by somebody who's more experienced. But I provide those practical stepping stones to help people move on from that disempowerment and organizations rewire their culture. So hopefully that's a nice summary of that. And
I think that's a great overview. Yeah.
How about you, Kat?
So I spent a large part of my career in the financial environments, and I often worked with very high-powered people. So I worked in the international capital markets when I first started. I worked over my life. I have lived and worked in 6 different countries on 3 continents. I started my career, I started as a ski bum, but then eventually I realized I had to go work. So I ended up in Tokyo, and that's kind of where it all started. So I worked in the international capital markets, then I worked in the high net worth investment, and eventually shifted into working with high-tech entrepreneurs and financing from angel investors and venture capitalists. And then I worked in the academic environment for quite a while and did research in the academic environment. And all of it, sort of the through line for all of that was, first, I realized that there's a lot of people with a lot of money who don't understand the capital markets and how to do investments and how investments work. So I tended to really focus on helping clients understand, and I was on teams of people. I wasn't necessarily the investment advisor. I was on their teams working with clients and things like that. But I ended up spending a lot of time helping clients understand how the economy works, how it impacted markets, et cetera. Then realized that a lot of our clients were cashed out entrepreneurs. So they came in with, multi-million-dollar checks to invest. And I'm like, so where's the money from? I know you're not drug dealers. And they said, so we were cashed out entrepreneurs. And eventually, as we were talking over the time that I worked with them, it's like, well, why were you successful when you keep telling me about your stories about your buddies who didn't become successful and you said they're smarter than you? And I realized that a lot of times we don't really know what determines whether companies are successful or not. And that was quite a while ago. Now we're at the point where there's more theory, academic theory, and more anecdotal ideas of why companies succeed. But the bottom line is we're still not really looking at the human element, the personal power, do people understand how to build their connections? Do they understand how to use their connections? Because that's really what almost everything boils down to, is how well can we work with other people? And then I realized that part of that is because of our education system, the way that education is taught, unless you happen to really be lucky and get really creative education. So for a range of reasons, I'm dyslexic, but I've never been diagnosed with being dyslexic. So I've always had learning disability. Yeah. And we're both from the generation, even though I'm a little bit older than you, we're both from the generation where we were just called stupid, right? So those types of things kind of repeated throughout my life, is that I've always been the dumbest person in the room, but most of the time I was actually in a room with like incredibly intelligent people. So I was happy to be the dumbest person, but I've always been at this disadvantage. So I had to understand things very quickly because nobody was teaching me anything.
Yeah.
And I had to understand it in ways that were different. So I've developed a very visual way of looking at the world. So what I do now with clients, and I also come from a very traumatic background, and had to do a lot of healing of trauma. So I've had to do a lot of research into that. And I think just like I'm really negative about the education system that it teaches us scripts, I think trauma research, there's two branches. There's one that's focused on the scripts and the medication and everything else. And I think there's a time and a place for that. That's palliative. But in terms of healing, we have to look at the whole body. We have to look at the whole vagus nerve. So between my sort of visual approach to the world, and being very oriented towards whole body wisdom, I'm sort of bringing these two sides together. And what I do with clients, there's a lot of people that I talk to where they've done incredible things in their careers. And then when they want to be consultants or coaches or whatever, they're just like, oh, I don't have anything to offer. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you just did these things and these things and these things, and really what it boils down to is they don't necessarily know how to translate what they do know. They recognize they don't have all the answers, but they haven't shifted over to this sort of experimental way of being. Even though they were experimental, they don't recognize that's sort of the value they need to bring. So that's kind of what I'm helping a lot of leaders do. And I'm using the word leaders in a very broad sense, that pretty well anybody who wants to create a bigger impact than they currently are, I can help them sort of map their systems and understand their systems in much more dynamic ways, understand where power comes from, understand how to build their own power by going through that palliative healing and strategic process. And like you, I don't do the palliative work. I'm really focused on the strategic piece. I can tell people a lot about healing, but ultimately they need to find a good somatic practitioner to work with. I can help them with the strategic. How do you now move forward? But knowing full well that the healing process is always there. And the healing process is actually an unbelievable learning opportunity. Yeah. So it really, in short, I'm helping people really figure out how to become good leaders, the ones who are truly collaborative, where better things are created and constantly created. So for me, collaboration means co-learning and co-creating. Yeah. So that's the type of work that I do. And that's really the piece that I'm going to bring to our conversations. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what strikes me is that we've come from these very different backgrounds, but we both worked across a massive area. And I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, I feel like after 30 plus years, it feels like I'm just getting ready. It feels like I've gone out and I've collected all of this data from primary, secondary, tertiary, regional, national, UK, Australia, public health. You know, I've worked across the whole damn system, and it feels like I've just gathered the data and now I'm ready to do my work.
Yeah.
It feels bizarre. I love the fact that, like you, I'm undiagnosed dyslexic, so I'm very visual. And what I'm hearing you saying as well is about bringing two elements together. I felt as well within healthcare, I've been always trying to bring together the main healthcare sort of narrative with what does that look like then in a holistic way. But also my argument in healthcare is that if we were really serious about healthcare, if we were really in the business of healthcare, where's prevention and where's empowering patients? And we invest shit in either of those. So it's like, if we were really serious about healthcare, that's what we'd be prioritizing, and we don't. And there's something as well about because being dyslexic, taking complicated information and digesting it into something really simple, because I've had to do that for myself, my own learning. And I'm sure in the world that you've just described, there's a lot of complicated information that gets flown around. Same thing in healthcare. And I've really had to kind of like boil that down. So I think we come from a really interesting balance of backgrounds, and we've covered a lot. So I think there's so much that we can talk about and glean from both of those backgrounds and share with other people in a unique way, where we have got this visual mindset. And I just think, going forward, And is it Einstein that had the quote, you can't solve the problem from the mindset that created them? And I can't help but think that, the beauty of the mindset that we've got, this gift that we've got of dyslexia, actually is going to help visualize that new way forward. And I'll finish with this, is that I know we both run towards the fire. You've told me your horror stories of just flying through the air and skiing black runs and navigating some really scary stories. And I think that's
long in the past, not in my current life.
Same thing with me, just like randomly riding a wild horse that just showed up in a field, with a bunch of friends in our lunch hour, with no hats on, nothing. And so I think there's something about both of us that we're not scared of running towards the fire. And we, because of our backgrounds, we're actually quite comfortable navigating that chaos and complexity. I feel quite comfortable in it. And I think we've got some interesting skills to handhold and share with others whilst they're navigating this complexity, because like we've said many times, this complexity ain't going away. And we've got a choice. We can either jump in now and say, let's go for this, or we can stand on the sidelines and be fearful and eventually get pulled in. So I'm like you, more of a, let's just throw ourselves in at the deep end and have some fun at the same time. Yeah.
And hopefully a lot of people that listen to this podcast will feel the same way, or if they're not feeling it now, hopefully they'll start recognizing, yes, we are in scary times. Yes, we are in unbelievable levels of uncertainty, and I'm not going to let my pessimism come out right now, but despite me having some really pessimistic thoughts and visions for the future, I also think this is a time of unbelievable opportunity for personal growth, for culture, for community reinvention, like just reinventing who are we as humans, and what's our role in this earth as part of nature, not separate from nature, but part of nature. How do we really create the future that we truly want for ourselves and the future generations, basically? Like to me, it's a really scary time, and concurrently unbelievably opportunity. Like there's just such unbelievable opportunity, and I'm hoping that we can embrace whatever fear people are feeling and acknowledge it and not try to stuff it down, but translate that into real action. And each of us has to sort of pick the areas that we want to focus on, but really like use that energy to make something beautiful.
Yeah, 100%. I've always been an optimist, but I've found over the last couple of years some of those dark thoughts coming in. And one of the strategies that I do with that is try to take that eagle's perch view. So if anybody's struggling with that right now, just take a step back, almost be on the eagle's perch and just observe and just disconnect from it and just observe and then try to because I think you're right. I think we're on the verge of we could be creating something absolutely fantastic and a paradigm shift for humanity. I like to keep focusing on that rather than the potential shit show that could be unfolding, because we're not going to be able to create anything good if we're stuck in that negative view and feeling disempowered. And actually, I think there is something about the test of our character. If whilst we're going through this uncertainty and navigating all this chaos, our true characters will reveal themselves. And if we can keep optimistic, learn how to collaborate, have fun while doing it, then we could create something absolutely fantastic. And I really do believe that, even though there's a lot of darkness around.
What we're going to do is we'll put our LinkedIn links below this video for people who want to reach out to us. And we would encourage people to either reach out to us on LinkedIn if they want to have more direct conversations, or leave comments on this at the bottom of this video, more along the lines of, what are you thinking about? What are, to our listeners, what are you thinking about? What do you care about? What do you want to talk more about? What do you want to hear us talk about more? We have some ideas of how we'd like to build out this podcast, and it will be fairly evolutionary. But the key thing is we want it to be really meaningful, because we are, as you heard, we're really trying to figure out how do we help the people who really want to create this beautiful future. I'm going to say beautiful future. I don't know what else to call it. Knowing full well that it's going to be really tough. But how do we do that together? How do we not do it alone? So how do we build community? How do we foster the conversations? How do we include people in those conversations? Anything that you think would be relevant to help you to really sort of move forward and be much more proactive rather than sort of feeling victimized.
Yeah.
So reach
100%.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, like I say 100%, because I think as well, sorry, Kat, to jump in, that, you know, we're going through it together because we don't have all the answers to this. We're open, we're curious, we're learning. So we'll be sharing that with you guys as well. But yeah, if there's anything that you want us to explore, and we'll also be kind of talking about things that we've been noticing in the past week, and sharing our learning as we're going along, so that we don't have all the answers, but we're curious and open and a bit bloody nosy, and we like to talk about things that we're experiencing and we're following up ourselves. So I think you can expect interesting conversations. I think for me, community is huge. I think, how can we start to build a community of like-minded people who are interested in knowing how to harness their power in a really positive way? And I think, and that's the people that we're reaching out to and calling out to join us on this movement forward. And let's all be curious together.
Yeah. Liza, I'm really looking forward to the conversation with you and hopefully with other people as well. So yeah, thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you again. Bye-bye.
Take care.